Well, let's see. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and then also how I got into landscape architecture. Originally from Southwest Missouri, the heart of the Ozarks. Grew up on a farm, and my family was in the lumberyard business. So I was introduced to the construction trades really early on. And one of the things that really interested me was just really, building vertically, more so probably even than landscape architecture at that point, because I really didn't know about landscape architecture. But I had a couple of choices to go to two different universities. One was K-State, and the other one was the University of Arkansas. And just before I graduated, an architect out of Arkansas by the name of Fay Jones just completed Thorn Crown Chapel. Beautiful little chapel in basically in northern Arkansas, right in the middle of the kind of the woods area, and just beautiful area. So that was where I was destined to go. So after starting school at the University of Arkansas, he was the dean actually there, but he left like the year later. And then there was a big shift from, looking at this really kind of site-based architecture to more of kind of glass buildings. And so at the same time, they'd start a landscape architecture department and program. And so they were heavily recruiting. And what I found was that I was probably more interested in the site that the architecture went on, more so than the architecture itself. So from that standpoint, it was a pretty easy switch. And again, landscape architecture really wasn't known back then, and even today, it's still not probably a regular profession people get into. But overall, it was it was a good switch. I think like most of everybody in landscape architecture, over the years, have probably started in architecture and then found out about landscape architecture afterwards. So it's given me great, ability to look at a variety of scales. And again, it probably fits more of my upbringing in sort of the farm areas and the settings, and then also just the building trade. So it kind of just, put everything together for me. I think it's not so much something I really sought out, but I think it's recognition of my leadership over the years. One of my favorite parts of my entire practice and my career is really community service. And I think that's where it's really born from. Being able to take my skill set, and I always talk about, being in communities or within organizations where I'm the only landscape architect at the table. And I enjoy that from the standpoint you have this mix of attorneys and people from the public sector and private sector and all these walks of life, which I think is really exciting to get things rolling. But I think, from the fellowship standpoint, I think it's, that recognition that, it's a lifetime sort of achievement of work, or basically a catalog of work over the years. But it's not something that you're really working toward being a fellow. I think the fellowship is really recognition of, what you've contributed back to the community. And I enjoy it. I mean, it's born out of my mom being the Chamber of Commerce, director, at my small town. I think this idea of community service was, born early in, and even my dad was a scoutmaster, which I became a scoutmaster, and I think there was this need to kind of give back to the community, and I was finding not only through scouting, which I was a scoutmaster too, but also through my community, through my skill set, being able to influence different areas of the community, whether it's through physical planning or design, or even at the legislative scale, really start to influence state statute to really encourage certain types of development. So that's my sense, and I'm really appreciative to ASLA of really recognizing that my work is probably expanded maybe beyond kind of traditional landscape architecture, but being able to expose landscape architecture, at least profession, to maybe a wider audience than normally would be exposed. What am I drawing inspiration from the moment? I think it relates a lot to sort of the larger scale work that I'm doing currently. It's about really community building and trying to set in motion sort of the larger moves to kind of influence what kind of community that we're living in and what people will live in the future. I was once told early on in my career, it's just like the project's not the hard part, it's the right of way, trying to get the right of way done. If you get the right of way, the trail's the easy part. But so I'm really working on sort of those larger moves, but also a lot of interest currently is really more about rebuilding current neighborhoods or existing neighborhoods, some that are either fallen away from the standpoint of an economic issue, whether they're up against sand and gravel industries or whatever else, but realizing that some of the most valuable landscapes we have right now are mainly internal to the city, and some of them have been damaged, whether it's literally, like I said, against a sand and gravel industry that has now depleted their resource and moved on, or a river corridor that's been abused, or a landfill. My sense of every one of those landscapes present this really great, unique opportunity for sort of infill projects. And when you do that in an area that had traditionally had a demographic of lower income, because of the property values and everything else have been depressed for so long, these areas have languished on, their ability or our ability to really deliver, great spaces. And so part of my focus now is looking at these damaged landscapes and doing two things. One, not only restoring them, but also really realizing that these are in kind of critical locations for infill, and being able to really bring a feature or something like that, or basically a landscape to an underserved population. And so that's been my main focus right now, and my continued focus probably for the rest of my career is really looking at how you go back into these cities, or how you go back into the city, find these landscapes and be able to really leverage them up, to create value, and also deliver, again, open space and parks to underserved populations. Project that probably influenced me the most, I would say it's probably not one, but I would say it's probably a collection over time, much like my upbringing in sort of the landscapes. But I started my career on very, very site-specific landscape architecture, working on high-end residential and different corporate campuses. But then I switched into really large-scale master plan communities, Summerlin in Las Vegas, 28,000 acres. So I started to see sort of a larger scale of landscape architecture. And then about the same time, I started getting plugged into very large area drainage master plans with flood control districts. So it went from 28,000 acres up to basically 120 square miles. And so my interest started looking at landscape architecture from the standpoint of really modifying a larger landscape, or having some kind of an influence on it. I also came to realize that most of these projects, and this is where I really kind of had the idea, or basically the reality of it, landscape architecture, rarely will you see maybe the full completion of your projects, or basically the full maturity, until probably either way into your retirement years, or possibly your kids' will see it. And I think that's the scale that I really enjoy working at right now, is the ability to influence maybe the larger, fabric of a community, more so in a very site-specific, even though I'm still interested in that, but I think it gave me the grounding to understand how you actually expand it larger. But projects that really interest me, I'm working on Maricopa County Strategic Parks Plan, and which really is interesting because we're looking at 10 years, 20 years, and 50 years of expansion of a park system, a regional park system, which obviously will expand way beyond my lifespan. But it creates sort of this interest that I have, and my philosophy of you have to get things kind of in motion. And a lot of times it's probably 2 to 3 generations before some of these larger regional scale projects really do come to fruition. What advice would I give to emerging leaders in the profession? I would say, it's all about credibility. And you really, it's something that takes a lifetime to build and a second to lose. So, as you start progressing in your career and your leadership, really look at, areas where you can make a bit of difference, but do it honestly. I've always separated my community service from my profession. And the main reason why is I never want to be seen, or and just literally kind of living with myself. I've never been in an organization to mine a project ever. I've actually formed projects for other firms, but my sense of it is that part of being in this profession is really about what you can deliver as a trusted advisor to your clients or credibility to the public. And I think if you keep those things, in mind all the way through and seek out those clients and seek out those projects, especially the clients that will give you the freedom and the ability, to influence some of their decisions and become really a good advisor to them. But I think, overall is, never lose your credibility, always build your credibility, and it will take you much further than some of the greatest works out there. I think your influence on the community, you'll be seen as a leader. So when you walk in the room, you can sit down at the table with a variety of different professions, and they see you bringing a very unique perspective. And I think that's one thing that I would also encourage is have an opinion, have an opinion about what you see, not an abusive opinion or how you go about it, but your point of view. Be able to describe, what your point of view actually is, but really concentrate on your community or the community you're working with or the project you're working in. It was like your own. So, that would be probably my advice.